Ladies and gentlemen, this is TVP World. I'm your host, Benjamin Lee, and welcome aboard the Eastern Express. On this episode of the show, we dare to pose the question: is that election result for real, or is someone playing dictator bingo again? Because tonight we're talking about Belarus in a story that will shock absolutely no one, especially those who watched our previous episode. The state television station released official exit poll results, claiming that, drumroll, Lukashenko has once again crushed his competition. Once again, against all odds, the man who lovingly calls himself Belarus's daddy is once more celebrating a blowout victory. Why? Well, that's a question one might pose if they were expecting a transparent election. Instead, we see a regime that's turned democracy into a ceremonial prop. So, without further ado, let's take a look at our latest report to find out more.
The votes in Belarus cast. The result, unsurprising. The winner, the one and only Alexander Lukashenko. With a result straight from the Russian playbook, almost 80%, he is basically locked in for a 7th term. Observers have already pointed out that this election was neither free, fair, nor even really an election. Even the opinions of voters that are available emphasize how great of a leader Lukashenko is. There is no dissent.
Lukashenko is time-tested. The other candidates, I don't know. I am still young, but I think that as long as we have peace, we should continue with them.
The claim of peace is one Lukashenko has often made. He says he has kept the country out of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, but doesn't mind letting Russians launch attacks from his soil, or carry out drills with the Russian military, or host Russian nukes. The message underneath the veil is very clear.
I am helping Russia. I say it honestly and openly.
Belarus's democratic opposition cannot express themselves in their home country. Those who tried in 2020 during the previous elections have been silenced or forced to flee. So, they do what they can, like protest abroad in cities such as Warsaw.
Today, there is no possibility of organizing any mass protests in Belarus. Even a one-man picket threatens that a person will be imprisoned.
With this election most likely in the bag, again, it seems that Belarus's future as Russia's best friend will continue.
And now let's take a look at the issue in greater detail. According to Russian political scientists, Vladimir Putin is terrified of swapping Lukashenko out for, well, literally anyone else. Think about it. The Kremlin is apparently so anxious to keep daddy in the driver's seat, they'd rather watch Lukashenko do donuts in democracy's parking lot than risk handing the keys to a new, possibly more competent or, God forbid, more independent leader. This is classic dictators supporting dictators because, well, dictatorship works best on a buddy system. And hey, when you find your perfect authoritarian sidekick, you cling on for dear life. But that's not all, because if you thought Lukashenko's questionable election results and Putin's sweaty palms weren't enough for a single news week, well, guess again. Lukashenko has also decided to wave his rhetorical scepter and declare that the war, yes, the war, referring to the war in Ukraine, has some rather curious culprits. According to Lukashenko's, Jews and the Pope are responsible. Yes, you heard that correctly. While you're still adjusting to the mental whiplash of Jews and the Pope are responsible for the war, let me reassure you, this is real. The president of Belarus apparently woke up one day and said, I know what'll spice up international relations. Some old school anti-Semitic and religious conspiracy theories. People are gonna eat it right up. Now, rather than blame, the invading army in Ukraine or the guy who ordered an invasion, Lukashenko has decided that it's the fault of Jews and the head of the Catholic Church. Honestly, next time he makes headlines, I half expect him to wave around a tinfoil hat and shout, the aliens did it. Let's be clear, Lukashenko's statements aren't just fodder for my monologues, they're dangerous. This kind of rhetoric, scapegoating religious or ethnic groups for complex geopolitical strife, fans a flame of bigotry, and no one is better at stoking those fires than leaders who fear legitimate challenges to their power. By peddling these outlandish conspiracy theories, Lukashenko essentially invites people to direct their anger anywhere but where it belongs. At a corrupt regime that crushes protests, vanishes opponents, and treats public opinion like a mosquito to be swatted away. So, where does this leave us? Well, the real tragedy is that the Belarusian people deserve a lot better. They deserve leaders who won't rig polls and wave insane conspiracy theories for personal gain. And they deserve to choose for themselves who leads them, free from the comedic horror show that has become their national politics. And now here to shed more light on the issue is Alan Flowers, chairman of Anglo-Belarusian Society, speaking to us in an independent capacity. Alistair, and welcome to Eastern Express.
Yes, good morning. Very pleased to be speaking to TVP World Express.
So, are we at all in any shape or form surprised of the electoral outcome in Belarus?
Well, absolutely not. Although it was a bit different. I'm an observer and a British academic who's been involved and engaged in all. This is now the 7th election, presidential election. We will remember we go back to the first in 1994, July. I happened to be in Minsk at the time. And we have had one, the most similar one to this, when really there were no opposition candidates came forward, was in 2015. But this one has been characterized by very lengthy imprisonment from the last election in 2020 of almost all of the leading candidates from the last time. Of course, the others that are not in prison, they are now in exile. So Belarus is a country without any free opposition to take part in this election. Very specific in that respect.
And one of the things that I also wonder is why would they bother keeping up this charade if, like you mentioned, there's not really a free and fair election. Everyone knows as the result's going to be, and people are not really happy about it, but it is what it is. So why even play pretend?
Oh, we've watched Mr. Lukashenko play pretend for years. It's the Mr. Lukashenko video show. He's got the consumption of his own people to think about. There's a degree of naivety and willing to believe in what should be the unbelievable. And we've got to feed this across into the Russian TV channels as well. So the great dictator has got to give a presentation. We love using the word democracy. There has to be a show that is meant to represent on the video screen that the Belarusian people have made some sort of a decision. Well, some modest numbers have turned up and gone into these polling booths, but there we are. Yes, pretends to make it palatable and keep using the word democratic. I suppose he even still holds out some hopes that some Western countries, some Western leaderships will be duped into using what he presents as his video show as sufficient evidence that he is legitimately elected. Well, by no way can something that is not even an election, that is a selection by himself, could that be considered a legitimate leadership election? So, Mr. Lukashenko, you still are and will be to, I hope, all democratic countries.
Right, I've spoken to a lot of Belarusians, and they all tell me that, well, the Belarusian government is very much different from its population, and Lukashenko is actually increasingly unpopular within its own country. So my question is, how is this sustainable? How long can a political structure hold when the whole foundation of it is already being hollowed out, with its citizens no longer believing and trusting in the whole system?
Well, the big problem is it's sustainable as long as the man at the top, which happens to be Mr. Lukashenko at present, has the funding to pay off security services, the dreaded OMON, the people in the black uniforms we would see in videos on the streets beating down the people protesting against a regime that, as you rightly point out, does not reflect the wishes of a Belarusian people who are highly intelligent, can be highly productive. That could be a rip-roaring economy on the eastern edge of the European Union, and a people that in history, and Polish people I'm sure know very well the history of when the lands of Belarus were in a great democratic Central European country. So it's not really in the blood of the Belarusian people, who are fundamentally Europeans with an ancient democratic history, who wish to have peace on all four borders, and certainly in a considerable majority do not countenance having their land used by an aggressor on their neighbourhood aggressor, Mr. Putin. To have their land used was an absolute repugnancy to them, used for co-belligerent purposes. So yes, in many ways, but at the present moment, now is not the time to get yourself arrested and come out on the streets and protest and take any action. As long as all of the powers are under the control of Mr. Lukashenko, as we saw in 2020, as long as he's being fed the money, as he was in 2020 from Mr. Putin, and got the finance to pay off his people that will do his behest, and he's got them in thousands and thousands, then the people now realise better to save themselves for the moment, and there will be a moment that will come when things will change. We've got in the next, even possibly the next year, the peace talks with Russia and Ukraine, bound to have an impact in some way. We could talk about that later, some way on Belarus. But he's mortal, he's age 70, coming on in years. So we could be in for some surprise. And there's already discussion, he's even discussing that this might well be his last selection, his last self-appointment.
All right, and going back to what we're talking about, playing pretend, I think it's also a good time that we take the plank out of our own eyes, because we do see a little bit of inaction when it comes to helping the Belarusians out. What kind of message does the West send to those within Belarus that still wants to fight for its country's freedom?
Well, very strong messages, and I think a lot goes unseen. Unlike Mr. Lukashenko broadcasting 4-hour press conferences, organizations and governments that are providing funding and assistance. I know we've got a problem with the USA at the moment, but Europe is still in there with about 30 million euro a year. The UK is on a sort of pro rata level, contributing separately as an independent country. But the West, I don't think as long as they're doing things. For example, we have a British embassy functioning in Minsk that is visibly on, if you look on the British Embassy Facebook page, there's considerable support and interaction visibly there for the political prisoners. So above all, at this moment, we need to be thinking about the over 1,200 political prisoners, many of whom have been there for over 4 years, all of the period of the last in-between period between the last selection on the 9th of August 2020 and now. So I would just say the West, let's keep up the pressure, tidy up sanctions a fair bit. And another one's going to be very important. Somebody has to be an advocate for Belarus, for the free democratic Belarus. We've got two Belaruses. The Belarus the people would wish to see, and that is represented currently by leaders in exile, but that free Belarus needs a representation and advocate at the peace negotiating table. So we're going to be looking out for a lot for the West to be doing. America and the EU, a number of EU countries have been very quick off the mark to call this process, this procedure that took place yesterday, to call it out for what it is, a sham, a selection, a self-appointment. The one word I don't see being used, unless it's negating it, is that this has been a free and fair election. No way by any means, and therefore we'll be looking in the next hours and days for very firm positions that Mr. Lukashenko still lacks legitimacy, but not only lacks legitimacy, this is not legitimate. I mean, we're going to have to play around with a couple of words here, though. There's the issue about what means legitimacy. Have the Belarus people really selected him? And what about international recognition? Because there's practicalities and there's de facto things. But we can recognize that de facto there's a person called Mr. Lukashenko who is controlling the country. And of course, we do realize people have to talk with that regime. There's everyday business necessary, as Poland knows all too well, with issues like the border and trade.
Hey, and last but not least, really quick, because we have a little bit of time left, I'm also very curious about one of the statements that Lukashenko made, kind of blaming the war in Ukraine on the Jews and the Pope. Sorry, it's so bizarre. I actually have to try to figure out what he actually said, because I didn't think it was true.
Yeah. The trouble is, I think he's been borrowing some of this old script that I thought even Mr. Putin had given up on. I mean, of course, Mr. Zelensky is Jewish, but on the other hand, I'm surprised he dropped the word fascist. Actually, there's something missing in that particular sentence. He seems to have forgotten that the script for Mr. Putin is meant to say it's all the problem of these fascists. We seem to have invented a Jewish fascist. I mean, the Catholic thing may be about the fact that the Ukrainian church finally gained its independence and separated out, and Mr. Putin certainly would not have doesn't like anything that evidences the Ukrainian culture and the Ukrainian methods of worship and their church organization as distinct from his Russian orthodoxy and the Russian cultural life.
So that must be the straw that they're trying to grasp on. Thank you so much for helping us understand that.
Bit of script. I mean, there's a little bit of background and evidence there, but
flimsy to say the least.
In the West for starting the war, even.
Right. Well, thanks so much for being with us on Eastern Express. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
And now we're moving on to the Eastern News Flash, a series of all the stories from the East that you don't want to miss. Recently, a plan by the Ukrainian military command entailed the transfer of highly skilled Air Force staff to the country's infantry units. Although this practice was reportedly halted, anonymous soldiers say that nothing has changed.
When news about the transfers broke, the Ukrainian nation became furious. So much so that President Zelensky himself condemned the practice. Yet soldiers who have asked to maintain anonymity have told the Kiev Independent that the transfers are continuing. The practice was declared a wasteful use of specialized troops, as well-trained Air Force personnel is hard to come by and requires serious investment of resources. An Air Force officer has now confirmed that the main reason for the transfers continuing despite outcry is because of poor mobilization results. He could not, however, reveal exact numbers, as the topic is considered sensitive. He believes that the practice will have seriously detrimental effects for the Air Force, as some of the transferred troops are responsible for vital engineering services, such as supplying oxygen to aircraft and replacing batteries. The transfer of about 5,000 to 6,000 servicemen from the Air Force began in January, but it is possible that half of them will be pushed back to next year.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has emphasized that Ukraine must play a central role in any peace talks with Russia. He would also like for the United States and the European Union to be involved in the negotiations with Moscow.
Ukraine's head of state is doubling down on reminding his country's partners of involving Kiev in any sort of peace talks. He warns that a settlement can only be reached if Ukraine takes part in the negotiations because, to quote, Russia does not want to end the war and Ukraine does. Zelensky also emphasized the need for European presence at the negotiating table due to Ukraine becoming an EU member in the future. The Ukrainian president has also questioned the clarity of Donald Trump's terms to end the war and pointed out that Moscow is not interested in actually ending the conflict. This comes after Vladimir Putin expressed readiness to meet with the US president after the latter declared he wanted to meet with the Russian leader as soon as possible.
The presidents of Ukraine and Moldova have been discussing the matter of aiding Transnistria's main power plant. Ukraine has offered coal supply in exchange for electricity.
At a joint press conference, Volodymyr Zelensky offered to supply Transnistria with coal at reduced prices, or even free of charge in exchange for electricity deliveries to boost Ukraine's grid. According to Zelensky, such cooperation could reduce electricity prices by as much as 30% in Moldova. After Ukraine halted Russian gas transit with the start of the year, Moscow decided to cut gas supply to Transnistria, despite having alternative routes. Transnistria is a breakaway region in which Russian soldiers have been stationed since the 1990s and therefore is widely considered to be under Moscow's control. The situation for its population is dire, as without gas supply the region's residents are left without heating, warm water and even power in some cases. Moldovan authorities believe that Russia manufactured this crisis to create instability in Moldova and blame gas cuts on Chisinau and Kiev.
An undersea link between Latvia and Sweden has reportedly been damaged. This comes just days after a Finnish court detained an oil tanker, most likely belonging to the Russian shadow fleet, over damaging undersea cables in the Baltic.
Deutsche Welle has reported that an undersea optic cable between Sweden and Latvia was damaged. The cable belongs to Latvia's State Radio and Television Centre. A NATO investigation into the matter has been launched, as Latvian authorities have determined that there most likely is significant external damage to the cable. The link was apparently damaged in Sweden's exclusive economic zone. Vessels which were located in the area near the link will be inspected. For now, 3 ships are suspected of being involved in the incident. Recently, the Helsinki Maritime Court ordered the arrest of the Eagle S oil tanker on charges of potential liability for damages. The ship's anchor had reportedly damaged crucial undersea telecommunications and power cables. The Eagle S is also believed to be a part of the Russian shadow fleet, ships of dubious ownership that Russia uses to circumvent sanctions.
And that's all on this episode of Eastern Express. But for more news, update, and commentary, please stay tuned to TVP World.